Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I offer for you a collection of scary stories that happened while being alone at night. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story spans a couple of years, but honestly it still gives me such anxiety to think about that I've only talked about it in bits and pieces. Some parts are still blurry. So when I was 15 it started. My mum reconnected with an old crush from junior high called Wayne. They hit it off fast, and soon they were dating. I didn't think much of it at the time. If anything, it seemed kind of cool. Wayne had a son my age called Brandon, and we went to the same school. He had two younger kids too called James and Allie. I figured it was fine, but I figured wrong. Wayne wasn't around much in the beginning. He and my mum were either out or staying at his place. But right before Christmas, he called me directly and asked what I wanted as a gift. I'd only met him once or twice at that point, and I felt like he was trying too hard to win me over, but I assumed he was just trying to make a good impression. Then he started showing up more, being around the house, and from the very beginning, something about him made my skin crawl. You know when you meet someone and your guts are just screaming at you that they're a creep? Yeah, that's what mine was doing. He gave me the most intense, suffocating heebie-jeebies I'd ever felt. But I figured it was just teenage angst. Maybe I was being too dramatic, and I tried to ignore it. Eventually, Wayne moved in with us. It was way too fast, but my mum seemed happy, and I kept quiet. One night while my mum was working a shift at the liquor store, Wayne and I got into an argument. I can't remember what it was about, but I was a mouthy teenager, and it escalated, and then he headbutts me. I'm standing there mid-argument and suddenly his forehead smashes into mine. I was too shocked to even cry. I told my mum what happened, but nothing changed. After that, things started to spiral. Wayne talked my mum into quitting her job, said he'd take care of us financially, and since she had knee and back problems, she agreed. Then the truly weird stuff started. That summer, I started noticing someone outside my window. I'd get this cold, crawling feeling at night like I was being watched. My neighbor told me they'd seen someone lurking near the side of the house, and one night someone actually saw him taking pictures of my bedroom window. I don't know if I was home or not. We called the police multiple times, but without catching the guy in the act, they couldn't do anything. Wayne, of course, stepped up like a hero. "We need protection," he said, convincing my mum to install an expensive monthly security system, told us to get a dog, a big shepherd mix we called Coda. She was the best dog I've ever known. But here's the thing. Wayne had hired those men to watch me, to peep in my windows and to frighten me. I didn't find this out until much later. I used to find footprints in the snow, always leading up to my window and always towards the woods. This man, this predator, was orchestrating fear like a conductor, and it worked, because we were terrified. It didn't stop there. Wayne started getting physically abusive towards my mum, towards me, and worst of all to Coda. I used to just sit with her and sob, feeling like I couldn't protect her, like I couldn't protect anyone. We felt trapped, financially dependent, psychologically cornered and always scared of the shadow outside the house. Then one night Wayne didn't come home. My mum called him over and over, and when he did show up in the early morning, his clothes were ripped, he was filthy, and he was covered in blood, claiming he'd been mugged, but none of us bought it. A few days later, homicide detectives showed up at our door. Wayne pushed me aside before I could answer any questions and told them he'd speak to them privately. And when he came back, he said they were doing some routine checks because a neighbor had gone missing. Nothing for us to worry about, and that they wouldn't be coming back. Then, weeks later, the missing neighbor's body was found in an abandoned truck. Officially, someone else was charged, but deep down I don't believe that for a second. I think Wayne had something to do with it. I think he got away with something horrible. Around the same time, we found out he was addicted to crack, He was a huge guy, tall, thick-build, and always carried himself like he was in control. You'd never think he was using, but it explained a lot. Everything came crashing down one night. I heard shouting from my mum's bedroom, slamming and screaming, and I ran to help her, and found her huddled in a corner trying to shield herself. Wayne was on top of her, beating her. I threw myself at him, screaming, crying, and trying to pull him off. That's when he grabbed me by the neck, shoved me against the wall, and punched the drywall an inch from my face. He let go, and I ran. And then he grabbed the battle axe. You heard that right. An actual sharpened medieval-style axe that he had bought and mounted on the wall. We thought it was decorative, but it wasn't. He started chasing us. My mum had already called the police when the fight broke out, but they didn't show up, and I was on the phone with 911 screaming, begging, gasping for air, and I thought this was how it was all going to end. And then he stopped. I don't know why. Perhaps the sirens finally got close enough, or maybe something in him broke, but he left. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. Eventually they caught him and he was charged, and we were summoned to testify in court. My mom was too afraid to testify, and I don't blame her. We still had to appear though. When we walked into that courtroom, Wayne looked at us and smiled. It's the kind of smile that stays with you until the end of your days. I wasn't nervous and I wasn't embarrassed, but I was terrified. He was proud of what he had done. He liked hurting us. To him it was just a game. I still don't feel safe. I still sleep with my windows covered and still flinch when the floor creaks unexpectedly. And I can't shake the memory of that smile. If you feel like someone's setting off red flags, listen. Don't gaslight your own gut. Because monsters like Wayne are very real. I got married when I was 21. Both of us were fresh out of college and believing that we'd met our forever person in school. In hindsight, we were kids, naive and optimistic, and not remotely ready for what it meant to be married. The marriage lasted 2 years, and we divorced by the time I was 23. The breakup itself wasn't some explosive event, more like a slow, suffocating unraveling. She started looking outward, searching for things or people to blame for why it wasn't working. Friends I'd had for years became suspect. Suddenly I was cheating. Every platonic relationship I had with another woman became ammunition in some imagined war I didn't know we were fighting in. The worst part? Even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, I still felt guilty, like I'd failed at something sacred. My parents had been through multiple divorces and I told myself I'd be different. But I wasn't. I chose the wrong person, I couldn't fix it. And a few months after the papers were finalized, I started having nightmares. At first, I brushed them off. Divorce screws with your sleep, but these weren't just dreams. They were recurring. Always the same. A girl, never my ex, though there were elements that reminded me of her, would walk into my house, wearing a long white dress, caked in mud and leaves, her brown hair hanging in tangled strands across her back. But I never saw her face, not once. She'd walk in through the kitchen door, tracking wet footsteps on the floor, and stop beneath the attic stairs, which, for some reason, were always down, just standing there. I'd ask her why she was there, but she never turned or replied. And it was then that she would scream. And when she did, the entire house would start to collapse. Not like a sudden implosion, but like the foundation itself was crumbling, as if her scream was peeling apart the reality of the place. Then I'd wake up. That dream hit like a brick every night, 95% of the time for nearly 3 months. It left me gutted. I've always been a literary person, and it was hard not to see the parallels. The faceless girl, the crumbling house, the silence followed by destruction. It felt like my subconscious was trying to punch through, and it succeeded. It haunted me in a very literal way. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. I don't even remember making that decision consciously, but I started sleeping on the couch, in the living room most nights. Something about the bedroom just felt off. And then one night, This is where it crosses from metaphor into something I still can't quite explain. I woke up at 2 a.m, no dream this time, just a weird electric jolt of alertness. I checked my phone, and there was a text from a friend, and I replied. That detail always sticks with me because it means I was awake and not dreaming. That's when I felt it. That slow, skin-prickling discomfort. And then a knock at the front door. It was soft and deliberate. I froze. Then a second knock. I crept to the window and peeked out. I could only see part of her, a white hoodie pulled up over her head, long dark hair spilling out beneath it. She was standing there on my porch. Something felt off, like dream logic was bleeding into real life. But I was 23, not exactly seasoned in trusting my instincts, so I opened the door a crack, and she asked quietly if she could use my phone. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I couldn't really see her face because the porch light had burnt out weeks ago, and I'd never gotten around to changing the bulb. Something about the way she asked, meek, practiced, made it easy to believe that she was in trouble. So I did something I wouldn't now, not in a million years. I handed her my cell phone. She brought it close to her face, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows. I finally got a look at her. Between 18 and 22, plain, a face you'd easily forget in a crowd, and she pressed a few things, held the phone to her ear and said, "Hey, I need your help." "Oh, yeah, okay." Then she handed the phone back. I looked at the screen and it was still on the dial pad, and no call had been made. When I looked up again, she was gone. Not just out of reach, gone. Already halfway down the street, walking into the darkness far too fast for someone on foot, and I watched her vanish. That night the dream stopped. It's been nearly 15 years. I've had plenty of reoccurring dreams in my life, sometimes years apart, and when they come back I always recognize them, but this one never returned. 2 months later, I came home from a late night beer with friends to find my house broken into, trashed, stuff stolen. I never found out who did it. I don't think my friends set me up or anything like that, but sometimes I wonder about the girl. Was she scouting my place? Was the whole cell phone thing just a way to see what I had, who I was, and if I lived alone? But I don't believe that was it at all. I felt something shift after she showed up. Was she connected to the dream? Was she the girl? I never saw her face in the dream, remember, only her back. Only her hair. And then she walked through my door and took it with her. Thankfully, I haven't dreamed of her since. It was getting close to dusk when I turned off the main road and started winding my way through the back roads of some nowhere. I'd punched in the wrong destination into my GPS, coming home from a weekend trip upstate. But I was in no real hurry, and figured a scenic detour wouldn't kill me. The sun was slipping behind the hills, and the pines were casting long, heavy shadows across the cracked asphalt. I hadn't seen another car in at least half an hour when I rolled into what could barely be called a town, with about 5 buildings. That's when I saw the bookstore. At first, I just thought it was an old house. It was, partly. The front half had been converted into a big store, with big windows full of some bleached paperbacks, and a hand-painted sign nailed crookedly above the porch that read, "Pine Books." A little cardboard box was sitting out on the porch swing, with a sign that read, 50-cent books in bright Sharpie. I stopped. I'm a sucker for weird little places like this. I figured I'd stretch my legs and see if they had any Stephen King paperbacks, and kept it moving. The porch creaked under my weight as soon as I stepped up. I was flipping through the box when the door opened behind me, and a woman in her late 50s, perhaps early 60s, came out barefoot and smiling like we were old friends. She had long silver-streaked hair braided down her back and wore one of those faded cotton dresses that looked handmade. She was holding a tray with a ceramic bowl full of fruit and a teacup with a matching saucer and lemon cookies. "Long drive?" she asked. "You look parched." I laughed awkwardly and thanked her. I didn't want to be rude, so I took the tea and fruit and sat on the porch railing and ate a few slices of pear. It tasted a bit off, like maybe the bowl had soap residue, but it didn't taste that bad. The front room of the house was crammed with books, floor to ceiling, mostly used, a few vintage-looking art books, and a whole lot of old paperbacks. There was music playing softly. She followed me inside and kept chatting, asking where I was from, what I liked to read, that kind of thing. She told me her kids were all grown up and moved away, said I reminded her of her youngest son who had just graduated college. The lighting inside was dim. All the lamps were those old stained glass Tiffany-style ones that throw this amber glow everywhere. I lost track of time flipping through their horror section, trying to see if anything jumped out. Every few minutes she'd come back in and top off my tea without asking. She added cookies and eventually brought out warm brownies. I must have told her no thanks, I'm good at least 3 times, but every time I looked down the cup was full again. At some point she said, "I'm gonna take a quick shower, dear. You go on browsing," and disappeared into the back of the house. That should have been when I left, but I didn't. I was groggy and my legs felt like lead. My mouth was dry and I couldn't remember the last time I blinked. I don't know how long I stayed there, maybe an hour, maybe 3. All the clocks showed different times. Eventually I pulled together the books I wanted and called out for her, but there was no answer. I made my way down the hall towards the back of the house, and it had that same unnatural stillness you only feel in places that are forbidden. I found her in the last room on the left. The door was open. She was in bed, propped up on pillows, watching something on a small TV that I initially thought was an old exercise tape. But then I heard moaning. Not workout moaning. The other kind. When she saw me, she smiled unfazed. "Oh, sweetheart. I left the register open. You just put in what you owe and take your change, alright?" I mumbled something like, "Okay," and backed out fast. Back at the front, the register really was wide open. It looked antique, with brass keys and a drawer that clunked loudly when it slid open. I shoved in a 5, took back a couple of 1s, and stumbled out onto the porch with my books in my arms and a metallic taste in my mouth. The sky outside had shifted. Smoke was curling across the horizon, and in the distance, the trees glowed orange at the edge. There was a fire somewhere out past the hills, and the air smelled like burnt pine. A fire truck roared past on the gravel road in front of the store, sirens screaming and lights bouncing off the trees. And that's when I saw him. A tall man on a horse stood across the road, near the tree line. He wore a denim jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, and was chewing on something. He watched the truck fly by, then looked straight at me. Clear as day, he said, "Town's burning." He didn't even move. Neither did the horse. They stood there, as the glow of the fire crept higher into the night. I got in my car, and that's when things got really bad. The steering wheel felt too far away, then too close. The headlights left traces across the trees. My depth perception was shot. More than once, I found myself drifting into the opposite lane and jerking the wheel too late. Once I came around a blind curve and saw a semi barreling towards me, horn blaring, high beams blazing. I swerved so hard I almost took out a mailbox. My brain kept telling me I could drive my car off the cliff and float down gently like a plane, or drive into the ocean and be like a submarine. I don't know how I made it home. I pulled into my driveway shaking, drenched in sweat, heart racing. I collapsed in bed and fell asleep for 15 hours. It wasn't until the next day that I looked for my receipt. There wasn't one. I don't even know what books I bought, but they weren't in the car. And when I tried to retrace the steps on Google Maps, those back roads, that town, none of it showed up. But one thing I can say, I haven't been able to drink tea since. Even the smell makes me sick. I've never shared this with anyone before because I don't think anyone would believe me, and because every time I think about it, it makes my skin crawl. But maybe it's time. Let me be upfront. At the time, I wasn't exactly living a model life. I was 20 and deep in the throes of addiction. I'd left Seattle for the sleepy marshland of Marlowe's Reach, hoping the rural quiet would keep me away from the heroin. Instead, it just meant longer, more dangerous trips back into the city to cop. And that winter it all came to a head. After one particularly long run, I was arrested in a rust bucket Honda by a guy who'd taken the wrong turn down a one-way in front of a sheriff. He was holding weed. I wasn't, but it didn't matter. They cuffed us both. I was processed and tossed into a cell at Blackwater County Jail, only to be cut loose at midnight after it was discovered that the traffic stop had been bogus. My friend had already been released, and I had no phone battery, no ride, and no plan. December in the Northwest is brutal, cold, wet, and pitch black as night. I was sick and shaking. I remembered a man I'd met days before, some kind of underground driver. The locals called him Shadows, illegals who ferried users into a city for cash. I'd met him outside a gas station in Bonebridge, slumped in a battered grey Lincoln, chain-smoking. I still had his number, and I called thinking maybe he could drive me to the Greyhound station or help me score enough to keep me from going into full withdrawal. The phone picked up on the first ring, and he sounded very eager and said he'd be there in 10. I remember thinking that was lucky, but it wasn't. He pulled up in that same long, steel grey Lincoln. The car was as nondescript as a government-issue vehicle, and humming just a bit too loud for my liking. When I slid in, I noticed how sterile it felt inside, like the air had been vacuumed out. Everything about him was washed out, grey hair, grey hoodie, grey skin. His eyes even looked colourless in the dashlight. The man gave me no name and just asked where I was going. We drove deeper into the city, picked up what I needed. We waited patiently while I did my thing in an alley near a shuttered laundromat. When I climbed back in, I asked him to take me to the bus depot, but he hesitated. You know, you can come back to my place, watch some TV, get warm. It's nice and safe. I should have said no, but I was high and cold, and he didn't seem threatening, just blank, like there was nothing behind his eyes. The station's a rough place at night for someone your size. I laughed it off and said, sure, what harm could a warm place and couch be? We drove out of the city past the last of the streetlights. Asphalt gave way to dirt roads, pines loomed on either side, and it was another world entirely, somewhere deep in the forest. When we finally pulled into his driveway, the house caught me off guard. It was huge, 3 stories tall. It sat on the edge of a black lake. The only light came from a flickering porch bulb. He told me his mother had left it to him when she died. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mildew, but the thing that stood out most were the objects. Every surface was covered in porcelain dolls, angels, ballerinas, clowns, on chairs, on shelves, even hanging from the ceiling like grotesque chandeliers. Their painted eyes followed you wherever you went. He offered me a drink, water and a handful of white pills. What are these? I asked. Just something to help you sleep. I told him I didn't have time. The bus left in 2 hours. He smiled, pushing them closer. Just 2 hours of sleep. You'll feel better. I pretended to take them, palmed them when he turned his back, and he brought me another glass of water and sat beside me. Very close. That's when the questions started. He asked about chemicals, how to knock someone out without hurting them, what dosage worked for different body weights, what's safe for a child, if heroin could keep someone unconscious for days without killing them. I kept my face blank. I lied. I made jokes. I said I didn't know. All the while, my heart slammed in my chest. He kept circling behind me. Once he started rubbing my shoulders, and I laughed it off and moved to a seat with its back against the wall. The whole time I was scanning for a phone. There wasn't one. No clocks, no windows. It was just covered in blackout curtains. My own phone was still dead in my coat pocket. He told me about his mother, her collections, How he kept everything just the way she left it, even the glass of water she drank from on the kitchen table. He wanted to show me something upstairs. I didn't want to, but I didn't say no. I figured if I played along, he might let me leave when time came. We climbed the creaky stairs on the second floor, and he opened a door and gestured me in. The room was preserved like a mausoleum. Nothing had moved in years. There were shoes on the bed, a giant bathrobe hanging from the door, a hairbrush on the vanity still tangled with strands of grey hair. "Sit," he said, and I did. "You're beautiful. Like a little girl. I bet girls like you." I didn't respond. He walked to the far wall and pressed his palm against the wooden paneling, and a section of it creaked, then popped open. Behind was a hidden crawl space. There was a small mattress inside, too small for an adult, and there were nails strapped to the corner, and a single frayed blanket, and a plastic water bottle and a flashlight. "I built this, just big enough. It's soundproof." I felt my blood turn to ice. He turned towards me. "What would you use to keep someone still for a long time?" I got up and said I needed to use the restroom again. He nodded. I walked downstairs like I was floating, legs numb and heavy. I pulled out my dead cell phone and pretended to talk to someone loudly. I said names, places, I described his car, described the house, and said someone was coming to meet me. When he came back downstairs, I told him I had to go, that someone was collecting me. His face darkened. A child being told no. But he didn't stop me. He drove me back to the city in silence. That should have ended it, but it didn't. I saw him 2 weeks later briefly. He was colder this time, sharper, like whatever hesitation he'd had before was gone. I believe with everything in me that he crossed a line in the days between, that I had been his trial run. I took down his plate, gave it to a friend who was a cop, and a year later, that same friend asked if I still had the information. There had been disappearances, children in the very area he had described once to me as his hunting ground. I tried to track him down. The gas station where we met, he never came back after that night. But I think I know why he was there so often. There was a school bus stop right outside. Every morning kids lined up just a few feet from where he'd sit smoking and watching, like a fisherman waiting for the water ripple before a bite, or a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. And that's exactly what he was. I've never shared this story with anyone before, partly because it's humiliating, and mostly because I still don't understand how I made it out alive. I'm going to take you back about 16 years. I was 31. I had just moved to Detroit for a contract IT job. It was a short-term relocation gig. I didn't have any friends or anything to do at night. And there's something about me that you should know. I wasn't in great shape, physically or mentally. I was over 300 pounds at the time. Life hadn't panned out the way I thought it would. I'd never had a real girlfriend, just few awkward dates in college that led nowhere, and after that I sort of gave up. I convinced myself I was focusing on work, that's what I told my parents anyway, but really I was just hiding. The only things that brought me any kind of comfort were food, alcohol, and gaming, which I consumed in copious amounts. That Friday night I'd had no more than a few drinks alone in the apartment. I didn't plan to go out, but I had run out of drink. So I ended up going for a walk to clear my head and buy some more. But I ended up in a neighborhood my Lyft driver had warned me about. I honestly don't remember exactly how I got there, just that it was cold and I had a buzz. And that's when I saw her standing by the curb. She was wearing a denim jacket over an extremely thin and short dress, smiling. I don't remember what I said, but I know what she asked. "You looking for company, big boy?" I nodded. I remember going for my wallet and she said, "Oh no, let's go somewhere more private." I followed her 2 blocks down across an overgrown lot. She held my hand the whole time. Even the warmth of her hand was something I hadn't felt in an extremely long time. And it sort of brought a soberness to me, the human touch which I had been lacking so desperately. We approached an old building. It looked like it used to be a workshop, boarded up windows and a half-collapsed sign. On one side, it was open enough just to squeeze through, but there wasn't a single light inside. My gut told me to stop, but I was drunk, stupid and lonely, and pushed the thought to the back of my mind. As soon as we got through the door, it was like a flip switched. She backed away and whistled, and 2 men stepped out from the shadows. I barely saw their faces. One of them was holding a metal pipe, and they were both bald. I barely got a word out before the first swing hit my left shoulder, and I went down, and pain lit up my vision. I tried to crawl, but the second guy kicked me in the side hard. My ribs cracked. I heard it more than I felt it, and I remember screaming and them telling me to shut up, calling me a fat pig and laughing. They didn't even take my wallet. One of them said something about making an example. They dragged me into a back room and threw me against a wall. The room was littered with garbage and debris, and they slammed the wooden door shut, and I heard a lock click. Through the door I could hear laughter. They'd clearly enjoyed this. Then nothing. The retreating laughter faded into silence, and I was left alone with just the sound of my own shallow and ragged breathing. I lay there for hours, on the cold, concrete floor, shoulder throbbing and blood in my mouth. I kept drifting in and out. Sometimes I thought I could hear footsteps outside the room, sometimes not. But the worst part was how eerily quiet it was, and not knowing what came next. I don't know what time it was when I fully came to, probably 4 or 5 in the morning. There was a faint light coming through the boards, just enough to see the outline of the room. Trash was piled everywhere. There was broken furniture, syringes, and I was picking up the smell of piss and rot. Panic kicked in. Everything hurt, but I could move. I tried to punch the door, but it was thick, and I noticed it was water swollen and warped at the bottom. I started looking around the room, kicking things with my shoes, in anger, and also to see if there was anything I could use to escape. And then I saw the glint of something metal. A rusted hammer. I dragged myself over and pulled it out. The handle was cracked, and it looked like it had been there for years, but I didn't care. I began hitting the door, soft at first, scared the sound would alert my would-be captors and they'd come back to give me another beating. But after pausing for a moment and listening intently, I was relatively sure I was there alone. Then I started hitting harder. Every strike echoed through my ribs, but I kept going. Chunks of wood split off, and after what felt like forever, I managed to carve a hole near the bottom hinge wide enough to weaken the structure. A few more hits, and the whole thing cracked inward. I squeezed through and limped out into the main space. It was empty. Whoever they were, they hadn't returned. Outside, the sun was barely starting to rise. The sky was a pale grey. I stumbled across the lot and onto the street, bleeding but alive. A guy driving a city work truck saw me and stopped and called 911, and I was taken to the ER with a dislocated shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, and mild concussion. They gave me fluids, stitched my forehead, and asked a lot of questions I really didn't want to answer. I didn't press charges. I mean, how could I? I didn't even know their names. I was also ashamed. The cops asked me what I was doing there in the first place. I lied and said I was just walking home from a bar, and they didn't ask any further questions. My contract in Detroit ended after 3 months. I didn't renew. I lost 60 pounds over the next year, not because of any epiphany, but because I just couldn't eat the same way after that. I couldn't numb myself, the pain was too close. I never looked for companionship that way again. And every so often I still dream about that room. The metal pipe hitting me, the hammer I used to escape. But in the dreams, I never find the strength to stand. And when I wake, I remember I did. I'm a lot better now than I was then, at least. It was Friday the 13th in mid-September of 2024. My boyfriend Zach had just flown into town to visit for the week, and up until that day everything had been completely ordinary. We were just enjoying the city together, sleeping in, eating out, and joking around as we always did. But on Friday, something felt different. We decided to go see the new Beetlejuice movie at the mall. I remember what I was wearing, a black and white striped dress, and flat black shoes. It was warm outside and I felt good, excited. We grabbed a lift to the mall and got there without a hitch, and stepped inside like it was just another date. And that's when I saw him. An older man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s. Grey hair, thick glasses and overweight. Blue t-shirt, khaki shorts, just standing there staring. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. You pass a lot of strange people in public, especially in dead malls. I told myself he was probably just bored. But then we stopped at the food court to get Chinese. And somehow he materialized there too. A few tables away, not eating, not scrolling on his phone either. Just observing. I glanced at Zach. He appeared to have noticed it too. After lunch, we wandered into the bookstore. I wanted to see if they had a Torah for a personal project I'd been working on. They didn't, so we left. And the man was right outside, standing just far enough away to not raise alarms, but close enough that it was unmistakable that he had followed us. He didn't smile or speak, just stood and stared like he was waiting for something to happen. I told Zach I needed to use the bathroom, and he said he'd wait by the door in case the man tried anything. That's when it really started to click. This wasn't some loitering or people watching, this was targeted. This man had locked onto us for whatever reason and was following us around the mall. The whole situation escalated when we got to the movie theater. We went inside thinking perhaps we'd lose him. It was quiet. This mall was practically a tomb compared to what it had been 5 years ago, with barely anyone there. We found our seats and unbelievably he came in too. Not to watch the movie. He didn't buy popcorn and didn't settle into a seat. He stood at the back on the far left. Came back, left again, came back, always pausing just long enough to make eye contact. And I couldn't even tell if anyone else noticed. The whole place was dead quiet and I didn't know what to do. I told Zach I had to leave and ran straight to the bathroom to call my mum. I was shaking. I told her what was happening and that the man had followed us from the moment we walked in, and now he was at the movie theater pacing like he was waiting for us to be alone. She told me to find security, but that's the thing, there wasn't any. The mall was nearly empty, with no information desk and no visible staff and no one to help. After the movie concluded, we waited for the crowd and slipped out hoping to lose him. We took a lift home and assumed that would be the end of it. But a few minutes into the ride, I looked out the back window and saw it, a blue car trailing us. I didn't recognize the driver, but I felt it in my gut. It was him. He had followed us again, somehow figured out which car we got into, and tailed us out of the parking lot. He stayed behind us for nearly the entire ride, all the way through turns, stoplights, and lane changes. Only when we were about 10 minutes away from my house did he finally disappear. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was planning to follow me home or just get me alone. I don't even know what would have happened if Zach hadn't have been with me, but I've never forgotten the feeling of being hunted like that. And to the man in the blue shirt and shorts who followed us through a mall and into a movie theater and then on the road, let's not meet again. And to anyone hearing this, stay aware of your surroundings. You never know who's watching or why. Let me take you back a few years. to a story that I want to share about mistaken identity, and it's anything but funny. I have one of those faces, at least that's what people tell me. I look like a lot of other people, and sometimes people come and be like, "Hey," and then realize I'm not that guy. Which is fine. It never caused me any trouble. Until tonight. Me and my longtime girlfriend had had a huge blowout, probably our biggest so far. It wasn't uncommon. I was suspecting her of cheating, and she always got aggressive and annoyed whenever I did. FYI, I was right about it. But that's not the point of this story. I had the custom of whenever we had a big argument, to leave the house and just go walking for a little while, and I wanted to come home once she was asleep so I could pass out on the couch and hope for an improvement the next day. This night, I was feeling particularly spiteful. I was so angry and so sure that the evidence I had against her, which was mounting now, was almost and completely indisputable. I'd done drugs when I was a kid, and only really touched this stuff at parties. But something rebellious in me told me that I wanted to partake in a little bit of fun that night. So I started making my way over to what I knew was the sketchier part of town. Just to be clear, I wasn't going to go out all night looking for it. I was only going to purchase it if it was easily available, because I had no real intention of staying too long in the sketchy part of town. I had been walking for about an hour and was thinking about sitting down at a nearby park and eating some cheap fast food. That's when I see a guy in a corner looking shady, and I think, bingo. I get to him and say, "What have you got?" I was expecting him to either run away, tell me to get lost, or start giving me a catalogue of what was to offer. But instead he looks up at me and goes, "Alvaro?" I don't know what it was in me, but given the crappy night I had, and the rebellious nature I was feeling, I was sort of feeling brave, and just went along with it. "Yeah, that's right." "Oh my god, dude. Come, we're gonna be late." I didn't even realize what we were gonna be late for. And he drags me as we go up this dimly lit, dingy building and up a few flights of stairs. When we get to about the 5th floor, he says, "Alright, be cool, let me do the talking." And he opens the crappy door. Inside are 5 people, all of them wearing hoodies but only 3 of them having them up, sorting out money and drugs on a wooden table. The place is disgusting, with debris and trash all over the floor. It's clear that they'd only been using this location as a sort of temporary hideaway for their illegal operation. And then I realize very quickly I am way in over my head. But I don't say anything. The guys start mumbling, give me a curt little nod, and speak with this other character that I'd seen on the side of the road. A thought shoots through my head very clear as they're making the discussion. That if the real Alvaro shows up, and I'm here, this imposter, I very well could lose my life. Many of them had firearms in their belts, and I knew for a fact none of this was worth dying over. I try to think of a way to escape, anything, but can't get any hits in my brain. That's when I start slowly making my way over towards the window and look out. From there I can see perfectly the street corner, and I can't see anyone around. I tell myself if he shows up I'll just make a runner, maybe no one will know the difference. And just as I'm thinking this thought, I see a black SUV stop in the corner and 3 guys jump out. That's when I see a guy who looks incredibly similar to me, but built far stronger and dressed much nicer. That's when I really start to panic. I could be in serious trouble if he comes up. and that's when I realize I desperately have to pee. So that's when I blurt out, "Yeah, I'm gonna use the restroom." They all look at me, give me a weird little nod, and carry on their discussion. I slowly start making my way towards the door, open it, and close it, breathing a sigh of relief. I can already hear the people coming up the stairs. I look up, the stairs go on a little bit longer, and I make my way up the stairs quietly and look down so that I'll be able to tell when they get to this floor. I wait. When they hit the 5th floor, I hear the bodyguards mumbling to the so-called Alvaro, telling him that it's safe to go in, and he enters the room. So do the bodyguards. And at that moment, I start running down the stairs as quietly as possible, knowing full well my life depends on it. It's at this point, if my life were a Hollywood movie, where everyone would start running out the room, firing shots, and I miraculously escape. But none of that happened. I made my way out the building, ran to the corner of the street in the opposite direction, and ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline fueling my system as I tried my very best to hide somewhere far away. I made it to a 24-hour diner, jumped in, grabbed one of the back booths, ordered a Coke, and tried to hide under the table, as low as possible. I sat there, in the corner, sipping my soda and just waiting, sure that they would find me, come up and end my life for seeing too much. But they never did. What kept playing on my mind is what must be going on in that room. It was quite dark in there. Maybe they'd seen me leave, seen me come back, and didn't really think anything. Who knows, really? I try not to think about it. It honestly left me with a fear so profound, I can't even begin to describe it. I broke up with my girlfriend shortly after that, because I realized that life was even more precious than I'd previously realized, and I wasn't going to be wasting a single day with someone who clearly was after someone else. It started one dusky Friday evening in DC. The clouds were still pink, bleeding into amber as the sun dipped behind the government buildings. My friend Aaron and I were 2 weeks into our internship, different companies but same loneliness. He'd been in the city a little longer, living in summer housing at GWU, trying to settle into a rhythm, but most nights he was alone. That's when John reached out. He was Aaron's old boss, a few years older, seemingly doing well for himself in political consulting. He messaged out the blue, saying he'd seen Aaron's Facebook post and was also in the area. They grabbed lunch once, harmless enough. Then John invited Aaron to a party at his condo in Anacostia. Something about that didn't sit right. Anacostia wasn't the typical neighborhood for political consultants, especially not ones claiming to be successful. Aaron got nervous. He asked around. A mutual acquaintance of ours, someone who used to know John well, mentioned that John had dropped off the radar a month ago. No one knew he'd moved. Turns out he hadn't. The address didn't match anything official. He wasn't even at his old job anymore. Still, Aaron wanted to go. He pushed me to come too. I was hesitant until he offered a Korova Blondie, a ridiculously potent edible, 500 milligrams of THC. I tried a small piece earlier that week. It wrecked me. Conversations sounded like they were in Russian, noise turned to crashing waves. The thought of being that high in a strange place set off every alarm bell in my head. We made the plan, told a friend back home to call the cops if we didn't check in, and told my landlord where we were heading, and tried to play it smart. We messaged John. He was cagey and evasive. First, he said he was out picking up supplies, then later claimed he was just leaving work, then somehow texting us while riding on the subway. Not a great sign in DC. He told us there'd be lots of girls, drinks, weed, and encouraged us to show up high, but it didn't make sense. Still, at 8:20, high and hesitant, we made our way to the Anacostia Metro, Just as we got off the transfer train, something hit me hard, not just the edible, a kind of mental switch. Everything around me sharpened. I was hyper-aware, calculating every possibility, every route, every risk. I didn't think it was the weed. It felt different. I told Aaron I didn't want to go. He hesitated, and we stood at the end of the station platform waiting, when another text from John came in. "Just got to the Navy Yard. Should be there soon." Then the train pulled in. A few people stepped off, but none of them were John. Just a second later, "Just got off the train. Should be at the turnstiles in a minute." But he wasn't. That was enough. We bolted, jumped on the first train out in the wrong direction. We didn't care. East into Maryland. We just needed distance. When we finally made it back to the city, we were quiet, shaken, and I made it home just past midnight, heart still pounding high and haunted. Weeks later, John messaged Aaron one last time saying we should go hiking, preferably without Hunter, and we didn't reply. Before I tell my story, I want to say I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing this for a long time after what happened a few months ago. About half a year ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For context, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful in walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So for about a year, whenever school gets hard or life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and just walk around for about an hour or so. The night in question was me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got on my shoes once I was outside, and hopped the fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walk down the middle of it and head towards a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time, walking the loop, and ended up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon on the ground and started to grind it against the pavement until the spoon part was half gone, out of boredom. I was chilling there for a bit, before I decided to walk around a bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park about 10 minutes away from my neighborhood, where I usually end off the night by staring into the sky. The park itself creeps me out sometimes, because at night there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides, and anyone can watch you from the woods. It gets too real here because I'm staring up into existence like a budding philosopher, while I'm lying on those table benches where I hear an old man whistle. I shot up because I'd never had any human interaction on these walks before, and I see this old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight on the only entrance to the park. I had seen him before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day, and I honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing the same fancy button-up cargo pants every day. Me and my mum have spoken about him before, and assume he's mentally disabled and probably lives with a caretaker. I had an interaction with him once about a year ago when I was walking home in broad daylight, and I passed the man who was at the time sitting on a bench. The dude looks at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with a weird smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, "I know." Anyway, back to the park at night. I just stare at him in that empty parking lot, probably way longer than I should have, because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were staring at each other for a really long time before he slowly starts walking towards me, and at this point I'm frozen in fear. Because why the hell was this old geezer out with me at 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up at this point where he comes closer and gives me this cheeky grin like he knows something I don't know yet, and I'm still gawking at him like a buffoon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or a movie when the main character just freezes in fear? Well, I have. And I never will again, because at this point I'm more frozen than I ever have been in my life. At some point, after probably 10 seconds of awkward standing, he just kind of half pats, half grabs my shoulder and reaches into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. The same plastic spoon that I was holding about an hour ago at the shop plaza. He kind of tucks it into my front sweatshirt pocket, and I guess something just makes my mind snap out of my frozen stance, because I book it to the public bathroom and lock the door. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night, and guessing that at this time it was past 3 a.m. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon, and it was altered. Have you seen that one viral AI-generated image where it looks like completely normal at a glance, and you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search it up. Now imagine that except a word carved into a plastic spoon. You can't read or identify any of the letters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour contemplating every single decision I'd made in the past year that had led up to that nightmare. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone and they could track my location wherever I was. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell me the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself towards the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back and for a second saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. The senile old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one last time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got back to my neighborhood, where I caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back into my house. I haven't gone out at night since that experience, and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. I still have the spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me, and if it was an isolated incident, or if he had been stalking me on another late-night trip. I would love to hear your opinions on the matter. I'm female, 23, and worked at a gas station for just over 3 years some time ago. At the time of this story, I would have been no older than 18. I lived in a heavily suburban area in the deep south that wasn't witness to anything too insane, but many businesses didn't take many safety precautions beyond what our training instructed us on, i.e., don't fight a robber, give them what they want, etc. My manager, Sophia, never scheduled women for overnight shifts. It was always our male staff. However, I had offered one night to stay later for the extra bit of money, and seeing as I lived a 5-minute walk away, I didn't see any harm in staying later. One thing I feel I need to mention is that it gets incredibly dark in the south at night, and the sun sets quickly. My area also had little to no street lights, so my shift started as normal. I manned the register, swept, restocked what I could, and kept things tidy for the most part. But a girl can only mop so many times before there's nothing left to do. So I spent a lot of my time at the register, waiting for the customers, and screwing off on my phone to pass the time to when a customer came in. I call out my standard greeting as I look up. Obviously, I immediately disregard my phone to help him out, but I notice he's acting odd. At the time, I had chalked it up to my imagination, but my gut told me otherwise. He asked me where the restroom was, and I pointed him in the direction. Now, to get to the bathroom, you have to walk past the registers and into a small hall, where our office and stockroom also was. He goes and I continue on as normal, completely forgetting about him. A regular of mine walks in, a taller man who had served in the Marines for 22 years, and we get talking when I hear something fall over in the back, like a broom or mop. My regular asks me if I'm working alone, and if I want him to take a look. I decline the offer, as I didn't want to get in trouble with my boss for letting a customer into the employee-only areas. He says his goodbyes and lets me know that he'll be back later for lotto tickets. More time passes, and I have to pee after drinking endless Powerade from the soda machine. I go to make my way back, and before I can reach the bathroom, I glance to the office and notice the door is way more open than I left it. I don't know what compelled me to push the door in with my foot, but that's what I did. I kicked the door so that it would swing open and triggered the motion sensor light. The light comes on, and I don't see anything until I spot the odd bathroom guy standing stock still behind the door. We made eye contact as I immediately backed up and out the hall. The man emerges from the office only seconds later and casually strolls out, keeping his eyes on me the entire way until I can't see him anymore. I called my boss immediately, and she called the cops. Apparently that man had been banned from every single other store in the area for the same thing, but never faced charges as he hadn't committed a crime yet. He continued to show up every day at random hours just to stare at me from over the aisles, without ever buying anything. I'm not sure what his intentions were or why he hid, but something about the way he stood so still, long enough for the motion lights to turn off, doesn't sit well with me, and I hope to never see him again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories that happened while being alone at night. If of course you did, you can let me know down below in the usual way. I'm sorry this video wasn't an hour long. Honestly, it was a bit challenging to try and find all these stories, or at least ones that I thought were worth reading to you guys. So I hope next one I can try and hit the hour mark. If you would like to join the ranks of the people on screen on Patreon or memberships, you get some cool perks, and yeah, if you'd like that, follow the description to find out more. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, have a wonderful night, and I'll see you in the next one.